Inscryption was one of my absolute favorite video games for the longest amount of time. But as more time passed and the more I learned about the additional lore, the less I started liking it. Playing the game felt less fun after learning the true story, and I wish I could remove the knowledge I have of the deeper lore so that I could enjoy playing the game again with my previous clueless intrigue. Unfortunately, I don't have that luxury, and being a man that hyperfixates on the things I love, there was no way for me to avoid the deeper lore. I have a brainworm in my head that tells me to meticulously learn everything about my interests, and Inscryption was not safe from that. It goes without saying that this video is going to be incredibly spoiler heavy, and if you care about that, then go finish the game and do the ARG and then come back. This is also going to be an opinion piece, so please do keep that in mind. My opinion might strongly differ from yours, and that's perfectly okay. Just behave if you disagree. It's fine. Anyway, with that in mind, I want to first return to the origins of Inscryption. The original Game Jam seed, Sacrifices Must Be Made. Sacrifices Must Be Made is a short game with a simple story, strongly reminiscent of Act 1 of Inscryption. You're in a cabin with a stranger and you are hungry. The stranger tells you that if you beat him in his card game, he will ensure that you do not starve. But if you lose, you will die. As you play, you learn about your character's backstory, and it is very simple. You were in some accident, and you told the stranger that you were the only one that survived. You lied, for whatever reason you had, and the stranger eventually comments on that, asking you that if you were the only one that survived, then who was the child behind you? Upon beating him, you are almost given your reward. The stranger will feed you, but there is a catch. You must make a choice on who will be fed, you or your child. The obvious implication being that the remaining choice is going to be dinner. This was a delightful short game with a gripping story that left me wanting more for many years. Aesthetically, it hit the marks perfectly, and the story was curious but simple enough to give you some weight to your final choice. The eerie nature of the stranger and the difficulty of the game at times pressure you to sacrifice half your eyesight permanently for the run. It pushed the idea that you were trying to survive. Not only that, but the cards the stranger used were frequently based around humans, mocking you, or perhaps turning tables on you. The stranger was framing your struggle in this game as you being the equivalent of mere prey hunted by human predators. It felt like the character you played knew that they were playing a risky game with the Fae, but they were desperate enough to take on the challenge in an attempt to survive anyway, and only at the end are they punished for their attempt to trick the Fae by having to sacrifice themselves or their child to survive. It was a very short, sweet, and gripping experience that really latched onto my edgelord heart at the time. With that background in mind, eventually Inscryption was announced, and I was one of the earliest beta testers for Inscryption. I had immediately sent an email to Daniel Mullins for the ability to do so when I saw the announcement. I was ecstatic about the possibility to not only play a full release version of Sacrifices Must Be Made, but also be able to ensure there will be a good game by participating in the beta testing. This beta test gave me a free copy of the game, which I was very happy with. I ensured that I still paid for my copy of this game by paying it forward, and buying the game for a friend. I genuinely loved this game. What I expected from Inscryption was a continuation of the idea that was presented in Sacrifices Must Be Made. The intriguing story of someone trying to survive. The weight of your character's life being on the line. I quickly found out that it wasn't quite that anymore when I played the beta, but I was still excited. Sure, it seemed to no longer share any similarities to the original themes of the story, only keeping the aesthetics, but I expected that he surely must have written an equally compelling story that could have been expanded to a full game more naturally, unlike with Sacrifices Must Be Made. And, of course, I was expecting Daniel Mullins' trademark to show up as well, the game playing with the player, which is something that Daryl Talks Games made a very good video on that I recommend you watch after this one. Unfortunately, I was sorely disappointed with Inscryption the more I played it. A majority of the player base was upset when the game performed its bait and switch upon completing Act 1, which is perfectly understandable because the game does not give a single signal that this is going to happen in its promotional material. I wasn't particularly upset about it in terms of it being a bait and switch, which was likely influenced due to the fact that I got the game for free, but it did give me a sense of dread for the quality of the storyline. Now, I can love incredibly cheesy acting. I'm a theater kid. I had a great time doing cheesy acting myself. And in the right places, it can enhance a game greatly. But all it did for Inscryption is detract from the story. I hope that the actor of Luke Carter has a great future in doing more acting for video games or whatever the hell he wants. But in Inscryption, I unfortunately have to refer to his acting as a cringe moment. I know, disgusting that I use that term. It's 2023. It's just cringe video footage, and we had to watch it for the story. Multiple times. It really felt like I was 13 and in drama class again, watching students poorly act out a dramatic scene. And having to sit through all those videos to try and piece together the story sure was something. It kind of broke the trademark that Daniel Mullins had set up in his games. The story was no longer between the player and the game, but between some random guy named Luke and the game. It felt far less personal knowing that every you that was said in the game wasn't addressed at the player, but at Luke. Especially with his random interjections during gameplay utterly breaking the immersion.
Okay, time to figure out what's on this thing.
Compared to Sacrifice Must Be Made, this was a downgrade, because sure, in Sacrifice Must Be Made you're still embodying a different person, but by all means in that game you are that person. The character has no face, no voice, you are just embodying them. You are one with the character. Luke is not a reflection of the player. Luke has a face and his voice and his own thoughts and ideas. You cannot embody him the same way that you can with a blank slate. And this kind of shows how much a mute protagonist can add to a game's story and general atmosphere, and why having a protagonist speak can detract from the player experience. And it's during these detracting cutscenes that the ARG and the deeper storyline gets introduced. And good lord, I despise Inscryption's ARG. What I thought would be a fun addition to the game's story ended up being pretty much all of its story. Now, I like me an ARG. I'm not smart enough to solve them myself, but a good ARG is very fun to then, watch back or read back or whatever the hell. I like them. As a concept, they are incredible and there's many really good ARGs out there. But in the case of Inscryption, it's bad. Because it is really all of its story. None of the game's actual story is in the regular gameplay. If you want to know what the hell is going on, go ahead and have fun puzzling or watch an hour-long YouTube video. I have a very abbreviated talk about the storyline because I cannot be asked to spend more time worsening my taste for this game because of its bad story. My main problem is that I do not understand what the point was of making the entirety of the story of Inscryption be caused by the Nazis. I've racked my brain trying to see how this piece of information makes the story any better and if it adds any value, but I just don't see it. The whole idea of the hidden storyline of Inscryption revolves around this nebulous concept of the old data, which is a concept introduced during regular gameplay. It's never specified what this data consists of, but everything keeps emphasizing how bad and evil and utterly vile it is. A little too much, frankly, because it gets to the point that it's put out to be a cartoonishly evil MacGuffin. And this is wrapped up nicely with a video of Luke smashing the floppy disk it was on. The reaction he showcases to the data is so equally over the top that it just cannot be taken seriously anymore, because we have been given no frame of reference on what it could be to decide if this reaction was warranted. The story made the old data too nebulous, which just caused it to become meaningless. This nebulous super evil so bad floppy smashing data was recovered off of Hitler's body through some encoded card pack of the game Karnuffel by the Soviets. Said data was then eventually recovered from the opposition of the Soviets via a spy and was placed in a box of blank floppy disks to be sent to the United States. This then reached the company, kekw, which supposedly acts as both a front and a legitimate game development company. The person who developed Inscryption, Casey, got a hold of the floppy and the game was infected by it. Apparently, she was so appalled by the information on it that she buried the floppy in the woods and left coordinates in a card pack in her house. Why? We don't know. She could have destroyed it if that was her plan, but she didn't. Eventually, she supposedly gets killed in an accident, and I'm going off of the interpretation that she was killed, rather than the fan theory that she's actually the woman who kills Luke at the end of the game, due to the way that the game itself keeps alluding to her death in various ways. Luke and Casey were likely murdered for the same reason, which was knowing too much about the old data. We still don't know what sort of information is on there, so we still have no frame of reference on why it's such a big deal and why we should care. All we have is the, ooh, but it's from the Nazis, so it's evil by nature. Which, I mean, yes, Nazis bad, but hear me out why this part of the story is very stupid. What I think that I hate the most about the whole story is not the fact that the old data is so nebulous that it barely matters, but the fact that there is no benefit to the story by making it about the Second World War. If the idea of the old data is that it's some magically occult evil data that can corrupt a game and give its characters sapience, and the storyline has no plans of telling us what the old data is, then we frankly could have omitted the entire Hitler aspect from it and not suffered any damage to the story. It does not matter and has never mattered how the data got to the floppy, seeing as it adds nothing to the story. It does not matter that it was on the Hitler's body, because you don't need the Nazis to make it clear that something is evil. In fact, having Hitler be associated with it to make it more evil makes it feel cartoonish, because the subject matter is not taken seriously. Because the old data is so nebulous, it tells us nothing of the significance. Why was it such a big deal that it was found on his body? Why would he have it? Now, sure, mysteries are fine, but without knowing any context for the old data, it makes it feel meaningless. What we know of the old data is that apparently it is evil, and that it has some sort of evil magic to it that can supernaturally make video game characters become sapient. And then somehow said characters can gain total control over the program. How? I don't know. It can do things because it can, and nowhere in here is the involvement of the Nazis relevant. Inscryption could have been a much better, less convoluted story had it just been about a haunted floppy disk that went rogue. Instead, it involved so much more that it didn't need and clogged itself up, and made the thing that's supposed to be mysterious and dangerous practically meaningless. The ending of Inscryption's storyline showcases a failure on Luke's part to prevent the spread of the old data, as PO3 succeeded in uploading his copy of the game to the internet. And that includes the old data, now being spread around everywhere, doing whatever the hell this super evil MacGuffin does. It would have been better if the old data just remained as us knowing that it's just something that is plainly evil that can alter and infect systems for unknown but nefarious purposes. A computer virus is already scary enough, especially if it's actually significantly, powerful. There is an implication that the copy that we are playing is the one that was uploaded, but that is incredibly goofy considering everything about the game. The fact that PO3 would definitely not have wanted Leshy to be the highlight of the first act of the game, and just the theory that is the game we're playing makes little sense, and it just kind of feels like a stretch to try and continue the involvement of the game playing with the player. Now, that is basically the entire story of Inscryption. I mean, mainly the part that made me really dislike any other part of it. This part just made it unsalvageable to me. It is just not a good story because of this. Like I said earlier, a huge problem with Inscryption is that its evil MacGuffin is flanderized to the point that it cannot be taken seriously. It disconnects the player from their avatar body and forces Luke Carter in as the main character, whose cheesy, less than stellar acting skills make it even harder to take things seriously, which the game really tries to do. Inscryption is a story that lost its way and is now a convoluted mess to attempt to tie together previous and future games and ARGs, instead of being something that can stand on its own. And the biggest part of this that was lost is the feeling that you're trying to survive. You are no longer playing for your life like you were in Sacrifices Must Be Made. You are playing a game within a game, and there are no stakes. There's no feeling of truly losing because you don't know what you're losing. Not even Luke suffers whenever you fail a playthrough, giving you some reason to care about him at least. Stabbing out your eye is meaningless because you know it's a virtual eye and you know that Luke is fine. You know that the virtual body is fine because it's virtual. And the game knows the virtual body isn't actually hurt, because you can stab out your eye 3 times in one run unless she will give you a new eye each time without complaint or commentary. It is no longer a story about survival, and there are no stakes, because you're never told what the stakes actually are. I don't have much more to say about Inscryption, and I'll probably uninstall the game at some point after this video releases. I truly did love this game for very long, but the more about the story that was revealed, the less I was interested. I'll stick to Sacrifices Must Be Made because even though it's small and simple, it was good. It was a good simplicity. And it is sad to see what convoluted mess it got warped into. So, that is it for this video. Share your thoughts in the comments. Like, what do you think of this whole deal? Do you think that I'm just entirely, wrong in my opinions, or is there some sort of agreement? I don't know, I'm interested to see what other people think of this, because I have struggled with this, just this feeling of disappointment I've had with Inscryption for very long, and I'm really curious to see what other people might think of this. Other than that, thank you all for watching, like and subscribe, and I'll see you another time when I'm talking most likely about Tetris for who knows how long, but you will hear about Tetris. Bye!